In this video, I'll be going over my first ever 2024 Senate map prediction. If Donald Trump wins the presidency but Republicans don't win the Senate, it'll be very difficult for him to get anything passed in office. However, luckily for him, the 2024 map is very favorable to Republicans. There are very few places where Democrats can expand their narrow majority, which currently sits at 51 to 49, but there are many states where Republicans can make gains to take back the control of the upper chamber. With 34 races on the map, we're going to begin by filling in the safe states for both parties. These are states where either the Democrat or the Republican is on track to winning by at least 15 percentage points or more. So starting off with the safe blue states, we have Washington, California, Hawaii, as well as New York, Vermont, where Bernie Sanders is running for re-election, Maine, Massachusetts, where Elizabeth Warren is running for re-election, along with Connecticut, Rhode Island, and finally Delaware. As for the GOP, nearly all of the seats they're defending, they're going to win by solid margins. We have Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, both races in Nebraska, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, Indiana, and even West Virginia. West Virginia's seat is currently held by Democrat Joe Manchin, and so this is going to be the first flip for the Republicans. Manchin won his re-election in 2018 to a third term by a margin of 3.2%. If he had ran again, he would have lost to Republican Governor Jim Justice, who is the GOP nominee in this race. Justice is very popular, and there's no doubt he would have been able to flip this seat even if Manchin stayed in the race. However, he dropped out, so it's going to be an even easier victory for the Republicans. And so with these safe states filled in for both parties, the GOP is already at 48 seats, while Democrats lag behind with just 38. We're now going to get into the more competitive races, beginning with the likely states. These are states that are going to vote for either candidate by margins between 7 to 15%. So they're going to be slightly more competitive, but one candidate maintains a consistent advantage. And so beginning in Minnesota and the likely blue states, we have Amy Klobuchar, who is running for re-election to a fourth term. She leads by around 12 points against her two potential challengers. The Republican nomination here hasn't yet occurred. In 2018, which was a midterm year, Klobuchar won re-election by 24 points. However, in a presidential year, these races are going to be a lot more competitive. On top of that, 2018 was a blue wave year after 2 years of Donald Trump, so she's definitely not going to do nearly as well as she did last time, but she is still the heavy favorite, and Minnesota is going to be a likely blue state. In New Jersey, however, we have one of the most closely watched races in the entire country. Senator Bob Menendez is going to resign very soon amidst a bribery scandal in which he's been convicted on multiple counts, and so he will not really be running in the election in November, as he will be vacating his seat. Andy Kim instead has become the Democratic nominee. He's currently a member of the House, and he leads by 6 points according to the only poll we have for this race. In the end, he's probably going to win by a slightly larger margin, but it's very unlikely he'll win by over 15, which is what you would typically expect. Menendez has really hurt Democrats in New Jersey, and it's going to show in this year's election. So the state of New Jersey is going to be likely blue on our map. Maryland is also going to be a likely blue. This race typically is very solid. I mean, just look at 2018 when Ben Cardin won his re-election by 35 points. He is retiring this year, and so the seat is now open, and we have Larry Hogan running against Angela Alsobrooks. Hogan is the very popular former governor of Maryland. However, as a Republican, it will be very difficult for him to win the Senate race. The gubernatorial elections are more about the candidates themselves, but these federal races will impact the balance of power in Congress, and that is why in such a blue state like Maryland, Angela Alsobrooks still maintains a narrow lead. Honestly, she should be winning by 30 points if she was running against any other Republican, but Larry Hogan is making this race surprisingly competitive. In fact, looking at the early polling, Hogan was the favorite. However, that lead seems to have fizzled out, and so as of right now, the state of Maryland is on track to go blue, with Angela Alsobrooks being elected to the Senate. And the final likely blue state we have on this map is Virginia, where Tim Kaine is running for re-election. Kaine was actually Clinton's running mate in 2016, although many people don't know that because he was pretty ineffective. However, he will win his re-election in the Senate. He leads by around 13 points. That is probably the margin he's going to win by, and so the Commonwealth of Virginia is going to be the final likely blue state on our map. Before we continue, only 12% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And follow me on Twitter for daily political updates, link in the description below. We're now going to go over the two likely Republican states on this map. There are only two more states that the GOP is defending at all, and those are the seats in Texas and Florida, where we have two Republican incumbents running for re-election. In Texas, of course, Ted Cruz is running for a third term. He narrowly won his re-election in 2018 against Democrat Beto O'Rourke by just under 3 points. This was a surprisingly competitive race in a blue wave midterm. However, in 2024, Donald Trump is going to pull Ted Cruz up from the top of the ticket. And with Cruz leading by 7.6 percentage points in the polling, there's no doubt he is the favorite. Ted Cruz is on track to being reelected by at least 7 points. In Florida, Rick Scott is running for a second term. He was actually a very strong candidate in 2018, defeating three-time incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson by a very narrow margin. Nobody thought Republicans were going to flip this seat, but in the end, Scott somehow came out with a victory. And currently in the polling for 2024, he leads by nearly 6 points. By the time the election comes around, he's definitely going to win by at least 7. We saw Marco Rubio get reelected by 16 points just 2 years ago. And so Florida is going to be the final likely state on this map, and it's going to be an easy victory for the GOP. And so with the solid and likely states now filled in, Republicans lead with 50 seats, the Democrats at 42. We're now going to get into the lean races. These are races that will be decided by margins between 2 to 7 points. They're going to be very competitive, but one candidate still maintains a very narrow advantage. Beginning in the Sun Belt with New Mexico, Democrat Martin Heinrich is running for re-election. He won by 24 points 6 years ago, but that's not going to happen again. He is currently battling a campaign finance scandal, and so he's going to win by a much lesser margin. So New Mexico is still going to favor Democrats, but it's going to be much closer than it was last time. Arizona is also going to be a pretty competitive state. Of course, on the presidential level, it is one of the top swing states, and Donald Trump is the favorite to win it. However, in the Senate race, we're going to see a slightly different matchup. And so in 2018, Kyrsten Sinema won her first election, and she defeated Martha McSally by 2.3%. However, she's become very unpopular and will not be running for re-election. And so that has set the stage for a matchup between Ruben Gallego, the Democrat, and Kari Lake, of course, the Republican. If you remember, Lake ran for governor in 2022 and lost to Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs was an unbelievably unexceptional candidate, and she still managed to lose. Kari Lake was not a good candidate on the Republican side, and that is why she is losing this race. This is a winnable race for Republicans if they had just chosen a better candidate, and so that is why Ruben Gallego is on track to winning Arizona by a lean margin. And to finish off the Sun Belt in Nevada, we have a pretty competitive race between incumbent Democrat Jackie Rosen and her Republican challenger Sam Brown. Rosen defeated Republican incumbent Dean Heller in 2018 by a 5-point margin. She's a pretty strong incumbent and will be difficult to defeat. This race is obviously going to get more competitive as the election nears, and in 2022, Nevada elected a Republican governor against their incumbent Democratic one. And so that shows there definitely is appetite for Republicans in office from the Silver State. However, as of right now, Rosen is still the favorite. We'll be watching this race closely as Sam Brown is a good candidate and can definitely stand a chance. So Rosen right now is on track to win by just under 7 points. We also have two lean races in the Midwest. The Midwest is going to be very competitive even on the Senate level, starting off in Wisconsin, where Tammy Baldwin is running for re-election. She leads by 6 points in the polling. There's no doubt that she is the favorite, and she is on track to winning a second term in office. So the state of Wisconsin is going to be lean blue. On the presidential level, Trump is still favored here, and the race for the presidency in Wisconsin is going to be a lot more competitive than this Senate race. And the final lean state on this map for Democrats is going to be the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. Again, this is another very important presidential state. Kamala Harris cannot win the presidency without Pennsylvania, But on the Senate level, Democrats are all but guaranteed to win, as Bob Casey is a very popular incumbent. He's running against David McCormick, who is also a pretty strong candidate from the Republican side. But Casey, who is now running for a third term, is undoubtedly the favorite. He leads by over 8 points. He could win by that margin, but just to be more conservative, we're going to place it into the lean Democratic category, with some of the more recent polls showing a tightening race. So the Keystone State is going to be the final lean blue state, with Bob Casey on track to winning re-election. We do, however, have one lean Republican race, and this is going to be the second flip on the map for the GOP. That is, of course, going to be the election in Montana, where incumbent Democrat Jon Tester is running for re-election. Out of all the Democrats running for re-election, Jon Tester in Montana is running in the state that Republicans won by the largest margin in the 2020 presidential election. Trump carried the state by a whopping 16 points. It's going to be very difficult for a Democrat who won by just 3 points in 2018, which was a blue wave year, to win his re-election in a presidential year. These midterm years are more favorable to candidates that are running in states typically won by the other party in those presidential races. But when we do have a presidential election, the candidate at the top of the ticket, of course, the one for president, is going to have a major impact on these down ballot races. And that's why Tim Sheehy is currently on track to win. He leads by 4 points against Tester and has led in all 3 of the most recent polls. Jon Tester has not led in a single poll since March of this year. So the state of Montana is going to be lean Republican, with the GOP favored to flip this seat. We're now going to finish up the map in Michigan and Ohio. These are going to be our 2 tilt states decided by less than 2 percentage points. And so beginning in Michigan, where Democratic incumbent Debbie Stabenow will not be running for re-election, which is why we have a matchup between Democrat Alyssa Slotkin and Republican Mike Rogers. Slotkin currently leads by 5 points in the polling, but this race is going to get a lot more competitive in the coming months. It's very similar to what we saw in 2020, where incumbent Democrat Gary Peters was supposed to win by at least 5 points, but in the end, the state came down to just a 1-point margin. And so we're probably going to see something similar. Democrats are still favored here, but you definitely cannot count out Rogers, who is a strong candidate on the Republican side. So Michigan is going to be the first tilt blue state. And we're left now with just Ohio, which is probably going to be the most competitive state on this map. Sherrod Brown, the incumbent Democrat, is running for a 4th term. However, considering the fact that Trump carried Ohio by 8 points in 2020, it is going to be very difficult for him to win re-election. But as of right now, he leads by 5 points against Bernie Moreno. Moreno is honestly not the best nominee from the Republican side, but not the worst. He's still a winnable candidate, and so we'll see what happens in the coming few months. But right now, Brown is narrowly favored, although you do have to remember that polling almost always overestimates Democratic support in Ohio. In 2020, Trump was supposed to win by just 1% according to the polls, but he ended up carrying the state by 8 points. The Democrats are very vulnerable here, and there's no doubt that Republicans have a shot at flipping the Buckeye State, but as of right now, it is going to be tilt blue in favor of Sherrod Brown. And so as of right now, my first ever 2024 Senate map prediction gives the GOP 51 seats, which means that they will be taking back the majority after 4 years out of power, Democrats at just 49. And looking at the changes on this map, the GOP is going to flip the seat currently held by Joe Manchin in West Virginia and the one held by Jon Tester in Montana, although they have a very good chance at also winning Ohio and even Michigan. But we'll have to see the developments in the next few months to see if the GOP really has a shot. And so thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and join my Discord server, link in the description below.